Excellent. So, risk of death by PowerPoint. I just got some discussion here that I think we were talking particularly about standardization and the role the data clearinghouse can actually play in that. Just to go back to the start there, there are many sources of flexible load that are available in the electricity system, and air conditioning is one of the largest and should at least be the lowest cost because the hardware comes essentially free, and most of the cost actually is around sort of the industry alignment and transaction cost. And so we're seeing digitalization or smart buildings as kind of the technology to sort of scale the application of air conditioning as a flexible load. And it's rather unfortunate from the point of view of where do we start? We start off a relatively low base in the buildings industry because control systems have broadly been a laggard relative to other IT industry developments. So the data clearinghouse then is broadly aiming to bring buildings into the digital world such that they can be enabled for provision of flexible load. And the ARENA mandate there around enabling of renewables, obviously that flexible load is an important component. It doesn't mean that the data clearinghouse is limited to the provision of flexible demand, but that is sort of a core part of its development. And so the great innovation we're doing there to enable that and bring buildings into the digital world is to abstract out the data collection part of it, the data infrastructure, the yellow box there, where we collect up data, yes, from the building, but also from emerging Internet of Things sensors and devices, and also from other cloud sources. Integrate all those data sources, federate them into time series database, and importantly, and it's relevant for this conversation, it's around structuring that and standardizing that data so that it is easily accessible via APIs to people who can actually provide the services. And obviously the focus of our service from the ARENA and iHub perspective here is around that provision of flexible demand. You know, in some ways you think, is that so hard? Well, actually, it has proved incredibly hard in the industry, and actually sort of defining out the value proposition for that data infrastructure, the data poles and wires that sort of floats a million boats, is something that we spent a lot of time doing. And, you know, for the building owners, what we're actually doing is creating functional ownership of the data. Previously, I've used the word data sovereignty. I'm calling it functional ownership. It's one thing to actually have some sort of legal ownership. It's one thing for a supplier to say, of course, it's your data, Mr. Building Owner, but to actually have buttons to push gives you functional ownership of that data. And so that gives building owners much more choice in an ecosystem of software service providers. From a software service provider's point of view, if we can create a scalable way of doing that really difficult bit, the data infrastructure, for the good of all, then we would have a whole lot of buildings sitting on the platform, and that would significantly streamline and reduce the cost of customer acquisition. And software service providers can concentrate on providing the value as opposed to doing the hard yakka of duplicating the acquiring of the data in the first place. So just going to drill down into that sort of standardized and structured part for you with a few slides. So Haystack is there, and that's a point naming standard that allows you to say, when you sort of see the name of the point, you can sort of interpret something about it. But I guess the additional standardization we're talking about here is the relationships that actually connect the different bits and pieces. And we're calling this a building model, and using the brick convention here, we've got three classes in the schema. One is the actual location, so a room is a location, and a building is a location. You have sensors such as temperature sensors and occupancy sensors and things, and you have the equipment that actually provides the HVAC service. And it's the connectors between those that are being created there. So an air handler unit obviously feeds air to our damper, so there's a feeds connector, and it's maintaining all those metadata relationships in a standardized format that creates some of the secret sauce there for the data clearinghouse and the global innovation here. And so the data clearinghouse is effectively a tool for operationalizing these standards, and that will create an efficient market for services. So the data clearinghouse, we've got the greens and the yellows. The greens being sort of the roles, primary roles, and oranges as being secondary roles. The data clearinghouse there is providing the data structure rules, the tools for assessing compliance to the structure, and all those kinds of things that create the framework for the market. But there's still the system integrator, who is the person on-prem who's sort of connecting things up and making the building and putting the building into the data clearinghouse. So let's just have a look then. If you were to go into the data clearinghouse and you got the splash screen in front, it's not the most attractive of splash screens, would be fair to say. There's kind of 4 key components to that, or the menus on the left. The second set of boxes there is the buildings that you've got permissions to look at. The third column there is just a little tutorial, and the screen on the right there is more for the system integrators to actually bring buildings into onto the platform. So here's some of the features there that the data clearinghouse has got. It's got sort of health check reporting and visualizations. You know, is there missing data? Have data sources, have they suddenly jumped off and gone dead and stuff? And there's alerts and stuff to go and fix those up. There's this Brickle query thing that, yes, there's navigation tools that you can go to explore your building and find data points and look at it. But there's this query thing that allows you to, in a relatively simplified sort of standard English format, sort of go out searching for things inside the building. And that avoids you having to learn Sparkle and other sort of IT querying, database querying tools. But the 2 things that I'm in my next slide that I'm going to sort of show is this application installation and deploying of applications as being the bit where this standardization suddenly starts to make a whole lot of sense. Here on the system integrator side, there are wizards inside the data clearinghouse that enable you to build up the building model. That's that semantic model that I showed previously, and build it up from scratch. And so inputting the various equipment that exists and describing the relationships between them. You can use the data clearinghouse as the tool for and the wizards thereof to build up that building model, or if you've already built one up through some other tool, you can actually import TTL files or building model files in there as well. And then there's the functionality for taking the IP address of the devices out in the field, the gateways and stuff, and putting in your username, password and stuff to actually then get the data streaming out from the device, and you can set user permissions. But let's go back to that applications installation feature here. And so this is effectively the marketplace where you can place your apps so that you could, just like a mobile phone, you can install your app when you want it, and then you're able to use the app. So here's your screen. In this particular case, clicking on that little menu on the side, the available applications, up pops the App Store, and in this particular case, well, we're only at the start. We've got one app sitting on there, and that is a measurement and verification app. And the key is that if you have your building set up with one of this, with all the relationships and stuff, the building model, you can just click install, and your building will get connected up to be able to use that particular app, that measurement and verification app. or at least that is the dream. Works with this measurement and verification because it's a relatively simple app. As we get more and more complex apps sitting on there, how much you can just sort of click to install will be an interesting thing. And then once your app's installed, you can run on demand, or you can click on it, and up will pop the window with all the sort of displays of data trends and all the sort of visualizations that you get. But it's that sort of streamlining of the ability to install an app in a similar way you would on a mobile phone that creates a whole lot of scalability and reducing the number of hours in order to get apps running and things like that. So that's just given you a bit of a view of the sort of standardization we're doing around the metadata schemas and things. And in terms of actual projects, we've got a whole bunch of different projects there where we're taking different buildings and creating different apps that will sit on the App Store. So DCH 1 and 2, that's they're the kind of the first cab off the rank, and a lot of that sort of constructing of the actual data clearinghouse building services layer was done there. We've got 3 buildings that are installed over 15,000 points. Well, even in one building alone, it's sort of being streamed there. We have that measurement and verification app. They were on CSIRO buildings, and now that's getting rolled out through the entire portfolio of CSIRO buildings because the facilities management guys liked it. We've got the schools, that's the DCH 6. We've got a demo system there of set up and being logged in the data clearinghouse. We've got Property New South Wales with 5 buildings. That project has just been signed, and so we're starting to get things installed there. Swinburne University's got 2 buildings and a demand response app, and we've got 2 other projects there that have been approved, are just in the contracting phase. And then outside of iHub, there are some other projects that are progressing well as well. And there is a significant conversation then with some of the state governments. So there's stimulus there of around about $60 million program, both in South Australia and Victoria. And so we're starting to organise to pilot buildings in Victorian government and South Australian government buildings as well, including 2 hospitals in South Australia. So I think that's just a really quick run through, and certainly happy to take questions.